Hey guys, so this is our final beginner bag making project, and this is also my final PDF pattern as DIY with Juliet, unfortunately. So this is the ÀDÀNNÍ mini wallet. Let us go over to the supplies, guys. So first off, my EVA foam. So I have a lightweight EVA foam. You can use your Decovil Heavy or Peltex or any other stabilizer you want to use. Then we need a lightweight non-woven interfacing, then exterior fabric of choice, and also our lining fabric. I am using satin and a zipper of 20 cm. For the panel A's, you want two pieces facing opposite directions. So you draw a line of 1 cm on the straight end and bottom, and you use that line as a guide to place your interfacing. For panel B, this is it. Please transfer the markings to the wrong side of the fabric. Then for panel B1, we need 1 piece. For panel B2, we need 4 pieces. For our panel C's, 1 piece each. And also for panel D, 1 piece each. Those are the pattern pieces we need to cut. Let's start fusing our interfacings. So this right here is panel B. Let's start by first smoothing out my fabric and removing any wrinkles. Then I am going to bring my interfacings panel B2. Okay, so I'm going to place the first strip of interfacing on the third line, not on the third line, behind the third line. Okay, so you're going to count from the short edge 1 2 3. Then you're going to place the interfacing behind the. Then the second strip of panel B2 will go behind the 5th line. Okay, so you start counting from the short end and you're going to place the interfacing behind the 5th line. So you're not placing it on top, you're not placing it before, you're placing it behind the line. Then I am going to flip my fabric so that the interfaced part is on my left hand side. So the non-interfaced part is what we are working on right now. Did I try to pronounce part in some kind of way? Jeez. So I'm going to repeat what I did to the previous side of the fabric. So we are placing this third interfacing now behind the third line. Okay, so we've done the first part. This is the second part, and we are going to place the last interfacing behind the 5th line. Okay, so it is better to do it like this to avoid any confusions. All right. So once again, guys, the first interfacing goes behind the third line, the second goes behind the 5th line, then you flip your fabric, then you repeat the same steps. Now if you decide not to flip your fabric, then you're going to place the third interfacing before the 5th line and the 4th interfacing before the 7th line. Okay, if that is how you want to do it. So now this is our pattern C, and I am going to draw a line of 1 centimeter on both short ends. This line is going to serve as a guide for us because of our scale level. Okay, you can decide to eyeball it if you want, but because of our scale level, let us draw the lines and use them as guides. Okay, so this is the line. I am going to bring the interfacing and I am going to place the interfacing on top of that line. Okay, so I'm going to place the narrow ends in such a way that I have 1.5 cm excess on the longer end. Okay, so I hope you understand the explanation. So you're going to draw a line of 1.5 cm in order to serve as a guide. Then you're going to place your interfacing, the narrow end of your interfacing, against those lines like so, and you are going to press. Let us move over to panel D. So for panel D, you are supposed to have at least 1 cm seam allowance on both sides, but if you don't, you should know that you are placing it wrong. Okay, so you should have 1 cm seam allowance on the sides, and I am also going to draw a line of 1 cm on the bottom. That's also going to serve as a guide for us because of our scale level. I am going to center and I am going to press. Our interfacings are in place. Now let us start forming the card slots. Now from one short end of the fabric, from the first line, we are going to fold and press the first line wrong sides touching. Okay, so you fold and press the first line wrong sides touching. Then you fold and press the next line right sides touching. So when you do one thing to one line, you do the opposite to the next line. Okay, so now guys, we are folding this line right sides touching, which means that the next line is going to be wrong sides touching and the other line is going to be right sides touching. Did you guys understand that? So we are literally doing the paper fan style. You know that paper fan we used to do as kids when we fold right side, wrong side, right side, we make a pleat. So that is what we are simply doing here. So now this line is going to be wrong sides touching since our previous line was right sides touching. Okay, I hope you understand. As you can see, I am using a ruler here. The ruler just makes everything easier and it makes the fold more accurate. So please use a ruler if you can, but if you do not want to use a ruler, you just have to make sure that everything is straight, nothing is wonky, nothing is slanted. Okay, so now we are going to fold the next line right side touching. Fold and press. Once again, make sure everything is straight, nothing is slanted. Use your fingers to arrange and press them down. Then you bring your iron and press. Okay. So one side of our card slot is formed and ready to go, which means that I have gotten to the fifth line. So one side is done. Now I am going to switch it to the other side just like we did when we were pressing the interfacings, and I am going to continue pressing just like the way I did to the previous lines. Okay, so the first line from one short end is wrong sides touching. Then the next line is right sides touching. Then the other line is wrong sides touching. And the next line is right sides touching till you get to the fifth line. Okay. So after doing that, after pressing your card slots and everything, one thing I'll advise you to do is to get a heavy object and place on it, because once the thing starts to cool, it tends to puff up. But once you use a heavy object, I tend to use a small stool in the house. I just place it on it and leave it and do other things. So once you do that, it makes the card slots, or it makes your pleats clean and crisp and flat. Okay, unlike when you do not use it and when it starts to cool down, it starts to rise and puff up and it is not crisp and clean. But we want that sharp look. Okay. So once everything is ironed, this is what the back should look like. Then this is the front. Okay, so I almost burnt the house down because my iron does not respond. Then I'm going to go ahead and top stitch my card slot, the top of the card slot. I am not really using a particular seam allowance, but an 1/8 of an inch should be fine. So I am going to top stitch all 4 edges. So after top stitching, this is what I have. My card slot is ready now. Okay, so now I am going to bring pattern B1 or panel B1, and I am going to center it roughly on the wrong side of the panel we just ironed. So after centering, we want to make sure that the length of this panel, the final length, is 22 centimeters. Okay, 22 centimeters long. So here I have used my clips to hold it in place, and what I am going to do is just to adjust it to make sure that the final length is 22 centimeters. So now I'm just going to bring my iron and I'm going to press it slightly just to activate the glue and hold it to the fabric. This is not the real pressing. I am just doing like a basting pressing in order to attach it to the main fabric and hold everything in place. So after that is done, I am going to sew the pleats of the card slots. So where the clips are right now, I am going to sew the fabric, not the interfacing. We are not sewing on the interfacing, we are sewing on the fabric just to hold the pleats down. Okay, so the pleats from the card slots that we made. Okay, we are just going to do a basting stitch to hold everything down. So our pleats are good and ready to go. Now I can do the real pressing and hold everything in place. Once again, you want to cross check and make sure that the length is 22 cm. You don't want it shorter and you don't want it longer, okay? So now that that is done, I am going to fold the raw edges of my fabric to the wrong side of the interfacing. Okay, so I am going to fold, I am going to clip it down, then I am going to iron and I am going to pin everything in place. After pinning everything in place, I am going to take it to my sewing machine and I am going to sew from the right side, okay? So we are just top stitching all around with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. After all that, this is what we have. Our card slot is ready. Panel B is ready. So I am going to keep this aside and work on panel C. So this is panel C. I am going to fold it right sides touching lengthwise. I am going to pin and I am going to sew. So the way I'm going to sew it, I am going to sew the bottom straight, then I'm going to follow the interfacing line. I'm going to sew right by the interfacing. So right now what I am doing is just figuring out how much I have there and placing it on the other side to figure out where I am going to stop. Okay, so this is what I am just doing. I am just trying to follow the interfacing line so I know that I am on track and everything is where it is supposed to be. Okay, and I am doing a rough sketch of how I am supposed to sew. All right, so sew the bottom straight, then you follow the interfacing and you sew right by the interfacing. When you get to the top or to the midpoint, you slant your fabric, you sew with the line you drew, you straighten your fabric and you sew the bottom straight. I hope that is clear enough. Now I am going to trim the excess seam that we've got. So after trimming the excess seam, I am going to remove my pins and I am going to place the fabric right sides touching widthwise. Okay, so the first time was lengthwise, now it is widthwise. So I am going to pin the bottom short and I am going to sew following the line that we drew. Okay, so it is not straight. Make sure you follow the line that you drew, and if you didn't follow the line, if you didn't draw a line, follow the interfacing and sew right by the interfacing. So now I am just trimming the seam that we have. I am going to turn to the right side and I am going to press flat. Okay, so you want to make sure you put your fingers everywhere, especially at the seam, that seam at the bottom. You want to make sure you put your fingers in and it is smooth in order to poke out the seam and everything so that it is smooth. Okay, so after pressing, this is what we've got, and I am going to top stitch with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. That is done. Panel C is ready. Let's move over to panel D. So this is panel D. I am going to place it right sides touching widthwise, and I'm just drawing a line right there in order to serve as a guide so I know where to stop in order to leave my opening. So you want to sew from one corner or from the midpoint to the opening, and from the opening back to the midpoint. Okay, so I am done sewing. I am just going to notch my corners and I am going to flip to the right side. Okay, so when you flip to the right side, you want to make sure that you poke out your corners in order to make them sharp. When you're poking out your corners, please do not poke out your corners to the point where you rip your seams, okay? So you want to poke out your corners just enough so it is sharp and crisp. After doing that, I am going to press. Then I am going to use a pin to hold my opening. I am going to use pins, not a pin. I am going to use pins to hold my opening. Then I am going to stop stitch all around. Okay, I am going to stop stitch all around with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. After all that, then panel D is ready. On the wrong side of my zipper, I am going to draw a line on the zipper tip, a line of 0.5 cm. That line is going to serve as a guide for us because of our skill level. It is better we have the guides. Okay, so now I am going to fold my zipper tip, the top end of my zipper tip, wrong sides touching like so. Then I am going to flip the end closer to the zipper tip to the top fold. I hope you understand that. I am going to pin and baste down. Once again, fold wrong sides touching like so, and the tip that is on the zipper teeth, you fold to the top fold. Okay, so you pin and you sew. Alright, so this is it pinned and this is it sewn. Now let us sew the zipper to the main panel. Now guys, on the bottom of our curved end, I am going to draw a line or mark 2 cm upwards from the bottom. That 2 cm is also a guide for us. Okay, so I'm going to place the zipper stopper. That is the zipper stopper right here, right there. I am going to place it on that line. Okay, so the zipper stopper should be right on that line, and I am going to pin in place. Now, in order to make our zipper fold or spread evenly around the curve, we are going to snip our zipper tip. Now, do not snip to the point where you snip through the line that we made. Okay, do not snip on that line or after the line. Okay, so your snips should be before the line. All right, so I'm just going to press, or I'm going to spread the zipper tip one at a time around the curve in order for it to spread evenly around the curve. I'm going to pin all the way to the end. I am going to take it to my sewing machine and I am going to sew following that line. Now when you're sewing, do not forget to adjust your zipper head so that it doesn't get in the way. Now at this point, if you want to use a zipper foot, you can totally use a zipper foot. Now that I think of it, I should have used a zipper foot. But again, do not forget to adjust your zipper head, and you can also use a stiletto tool at this point in order to make you just make your life or sewing this part easier. Okay, so once again, sew around the curve. Guys, you want to sew slowly. Okay, do not rush. We are not in a race. Sew slowly, and when you get to the zipper stopper, that is where your stitch should stop. Okay, so do not sew past the zipper stopper. Do not forget to back stitch at the beginning and the end. So this is what we've got. My zipper is sewn to the main panel, ready and good to go. Now guys, I am going to repeat the same thing to the other panel A. So you want to make sure that your zipper is right size touching the main panel. I think I forgot to mention that. You want to make sure it is right size touching. I am going to repeat the same to the other side, and I am going to sew right size touching. So this is my panel. Now if you used a fusible fleece, you want to iron like so. Okay, this is the first prototype I made. So after that, I am going to sew, or I am going to measure 5 centimeters from the bottom of the main panel where we've just sewn the zipper to. I am going to measure 5 cm upwards. I am going to sew, and I'm going to leave long thread tails at the top. Okay, so in order to tie our thread tails on the wrong side, you're going to flip your main panel to the wrong side, so wrong side up. Then you're going to pull your lining thread. When you pull your lining thread slightly, you should see the main panel or the main thread pop up. Then you should use a pin to pull the main panel thread out. Then you tie and you cut the excess thread. Now guys, I intentionally used different colors for the main fabric and for the main thread and the lining thread rather, in order to see or to prove a point. Okay, so using a matching thread or using matching threads is compulsory. Okay, so now I'm going to place my panel right size touching, and I'm going to sew the bottom right by the interfacing. So that is done, and this is what we have. Now I am going to open the zipper and fold my main panel like so. So the middle of the zipper should be in the middle of the seam, and what we are doing now is that we are just going to form the depth. Now guys, we are going to sew. I think I used 1 cm. I used 1 cm, but what you want to do is just to sew right by the zipper stopper. You don't want to sew on the zipper stopper, you just want to sew before the zipper stopper, so to form the depth. Okay, so after doing that, I am going to cut the excess that we have, and I am going to turn to the right side. When you turn the depth to the right side, you want to make sure you put your fingers in so that you can poke out that corner and it should look how it's supposed to look. So this is what mine is looking like. I hope yours is better. And after that is done, I am going to fold the top of the panel to the wrong side. You can decide to press if you want, but because it is actually okay and because I'm using EVA foam, I didn't press. So I am going to use my clips and hold that in place for now. Then after that, I am going to mark from the middle seam. I am going to mark 1.5 cm on each side of the middle. So I'm just going to take my tape roll and I'm going to mark 1.5 cm on each side. So the new length that we have is 3 cm. Okay, so the old length is 3 cm, 1.5 on each side. I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and I'm going to stop stitch with an 8 top and 8 seam allowance, and do not back stitch. Leave long thread tails so that we can tie them up on the wrong sides like we did previously. Okay, now you can keep this aside. Back to the lining panels. Now we want to form our pockets. Okay, so I'm going to bring panel C and D. Panel C, the wrong side of panel C folds inwards by itself, so that is the part that's going to be inside of the wallet. Okay, so now I'm just going to place panel C between that seam, or on top of that seam where the interfacing stops on panel C. Okay, so in the middle of that line, I am going to clip like so, and I am going to take it to my sewing machine. I am going to follow the previous seam I have on panel D. So can you notice how I am sewing? I am not sewing it, panel C is not folded in. Okay, so we still have the fabric excess of panel C. All right, this is what I am saying. Now I am going to do the same to the other side. So this is what we've got. The excess of panel C is still visible. Okay, so now I am going to close the bottom of panel D. The shorter end, guys, is the bottom. I am going to sew using the previous stitch that I have on panel D, and I am going to sew and stop before I get to the bump, okay, or to the bulk. Okay, make sure you don't climb the bulk. We are not climbing the bulk. Stop before you get to the bulk, and make sure you back stitch at the beginning and the end. So that's right there made panel D closed. The bottom of panel D is now closed. Our pocket is almost done, but we still have panel C, those two ends, or those two shorter ends of panel D, right? These two shorter legs, we have to close them short, okay? So sew separately, backstitch at the top, and stop before you get to the bulk. Make sure you do not climb the bulk. Repeat the same to the other side, and that is that for that. Our pocket is ready to go. Now let us move over to panel B. Now this time around, we are finishing the lining, we are completing the lining. We are just going to add panel B to the pocket we just finished. So what I'm going to do now is to mark the middle of panel B on the straight end. So you mark the middle like so, and you place the closed part. Remember, we closed the bottom of panel D to form the pockets, okay? So that closed part I am going to place in the middle of panel B, and I am going to fold down the raw edges or the excess fabric of panel C like so. I am going to clip in place, and I am going to take it to my sewing machine and sew one side at a time, okay? So you can also both sides. You can sew both sides when it is clipped down. So when I take it to my sewing machine, I am going to remove one clip from one side so that I have a flat surface to work with. Then I am going to sew like that. So you want to make sure that you adjust and make sure everything is in place, everything is in middle. What's supposed to be in the middle is in the middle, and you are good to go, okay? So this is what I was talking about. So I removed one pin or one clip from one side. You can use your pin on this part if you want, just to make sure one side is flat. Then after doing that, I am going to sew the second side. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Just follow the previous seam that you have on the wrong side of panel D, okay? The previous seam where we attached panel C to panel D. Follow the previous seam on panel C, rather. I said panel D. So what I'm doing now is just clipping everything in place, and I am going to place it on my sewing machine like so, and I am going to sew. So this is it, done and ready to go. For the pink wallet, I used waterproof canvas for the lining, so I didn't use interfacing and I didn't fold anything to the wrong side, okay? I didn't fold panel B to the wrong side. Now we are going to bring out the lining panel and the main panel to form a complete wallet. So I'm just going to place the side of our lining panel to the folded top end of our main panel. So the side of our lining panel that is open is against the side of our main panel that has the zipper. So what I am doing here is that I am just trying to align the center seams. So the center seams of both panels are aligned. You can use your needle and thread to hold everything together. Do a blind stitch. A blind stitch is nothing complicated, but I am using my contact cement. I decided to use my contact cement because it is easier for me, and because I did not fold the edges of my lining panel, so there is nothing for me to hold if I decide to use my needle and thread. That is why I have decided to use my contact cement. So I'm just placing the lining seam to seam, middle seam to middle seam. I'm going to first arrange one side, then I am going to arrange the other, I am just going to clip everything in place, make sure everything is where it is supposed to be before I take it to my sewing machine and sew. So make sure the edges are aligned, make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. Okay, so one side is almost done, then I am going to move to the next side. So both panels are glued together. I used the clips for extra support. Now I am going to take it to my sewing machine. I am going to sew, starting from one straight end. I am going to sew down to where we have the previous seam and do the other side. Okay, so I'm going to take it to the sewing machine now, and I am going to show you guys what I mean. Okay, so we are simply starting our stitch from one straight end from the edge of the zipper. I am going to sew using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So you sew, guys, please sew slowly. Okay, you don't need to rush. Take your time, one stitch at a time. Sew, and make sure you adjust the wallet in such a way that it is easy for you to move around. And again, make sure you are catching the lining panel. Okay, so when you put your needle down, raise the presser foot up a little bit to see that you are catching the lining panel. And here I am going to end my seam on the previous stitch that we made. And remember to leave long thread tails both at the beginning and the end, so we will tie it at the back. So now I am going to do the straight end from the previous seam down to the edge of the zipper. Let it meet the other seam that we just made. Okay, so if you don't want to do this part, it is fine. If you sewn, or if you've used your contact cement, it would hold fine, because that part is really tricky. So this is the second side, sewing from one curve down to the edge. Okay, so make sure you sew slowly, then you sew the straight edge. All right, so this is the final result. Do let me know what you think down in the comment section. This is our final beginner bag making project. This is simple, straightforward, nothing complicated. I hope yours is prettier than mine. I hope you find this easier and nothing complicated. This is the first prototype I made. The contact cement I used was bad. That's why we have bulging on the face of the wallet, but overall it is great. Let me know what you think in the comment section, and see you in my next video. Bye.